I never imagined I'd witness a moment so outrageously entitled that someone would disrupt a funeral procession. But after living in Oakwood Estates for 3 years, I've learned there's truly no limit to what certain people will do when they believe they're the ones running the world. Our HOA president, Karen Wilkinson, had always been unbearable with her constant clipboard patrols and violation notices for grass growing 1/4 of an inch too tall. But what happened last Tuesday crossed a line I didn't even realize existed. It was a heavy, somber, and heavy morning. My neighbor across the street, Mr. Jenkins, had passed away after a long battle with cancer. He was a retired veteran, deeply loved by everyone in the neighborhood, everyone except, of course, Karen. Mr. Jenkins and Karen had been butting heads for years over the American flag he proudly displayed in his yard. Karen insisted it violated neighborhood aesthetic standards, whatever that was supposed to mean. The man had served his country for 3 decades, but apparently his patriotism clashed with Karen's precious vision of suburban perfection. The funeral procession was scheduled to pass through our neighborhood because Mr. Jenkins had specifically requested in his will to take one final trip past the home he cherished. His family coordinated with local police to make sure the procession would be respectful and properly escorted. I stood outside on my lawn with a group of neighbors waiting quietly, ready to pay our respects as the line of cars with their headlights on came through. That's when I saw Karen stomping down the sidewalk, her face twisted into that familiar expression of self-righteous outrage that always spelled trouble. She wore her usual uniform crisp khaki pants, a polo with the HOA logo stitched across the chest, and that absurd lanyard with her laminated president badge swinging from it. She'd gotten it printed at a local shop, a detail that never stops making me roll my eyes. "What exactly is happening here?" she barked, glaring at us as we stood respectfully by the curb. "Why is everyone loitering? This is a violation of community guidelines." Section 4.3 clearly states, "We're waiting for Mr. Jenkins' funeral procession," Mrs. Abernathy whispered gently. "They'll be coming any moment now." Karen's face morphed into pure disbelief. "A funeral procession? Through our neighborhood? Who approved this?" As the HOA president, I should have been consulted. There are protocols for events like this. I couldn't stop myself from stepping in. "Karen, it's a funeral procession. They already have police escorts and permits. The family doesn't need HOA approval." She turned toward me with the disdain had practically become used to. Ever since I'd successfully appealed her petty mailbox violation at a community meeting, making her look foolish in front of everyone, I had become her favorite enemy. "I don't recall speaking to you, Mr. Harrison," she said with an icy smile. "And for your information, any organized activity affecting traffic flow requires board approval. It's in the bylaws." Before I could respond, we heard the distant wail of a police siren, signaling the procession's approach. Everyone around me fell silent out of respect. Everyone except Karen, who was angrily tapping away at her phone, likely messaging her board loyalists who never questioned her extreme interpretations of the rules. The police motorcycle led the way into the street, followed by the hearse carrying Mr. Jenkins' flag-draped casket. Behind it came the family's cars, and then a long line of vehicles with headlights shining, many flying small American flags. It was a powerful, emotional sight. I noticed Mrs. Abernathy wiping tears from her eyes. Then, just as the hearse reached us, Karen did something unthinkable. She marched straight into the road, planting herself directly in front of the hearse and holding out her hand like some deranged, self-appointed traffic authority. The hearse slammed on the brakes, triggering a chain reaction of cars stopping behind it. "This procession does not have HOA approval," she shouted so loudly that everyone could hear. "You need to reroute. This is a private community, and we have rules." A police officer on the motorcycle immediately circled back and pulled up beside her. "Ma'am, you need to step out of the street," he said firmly. "This is an authorized funeral procession with the right of way." But Karen didn't move. Instead, she puffed out her chest and flashed that ridiculous badge. "I am the president of this homeowners association," she declared. "We did not authorize this procession through the neighborhood. I have the authority to deny entry to unauthorized vehicles." I could barely process what I was seeing. Another officer in the procession pulled up, and Mr. Jenkins' son stepped out of his car, grief and shock written across his face. "Ma'am," the first officer said, losing patience, "it is a criminal offense in this state to interfere with a funeral procession. Step aside now, or I will have to place you under arrest." That should have ended things. Any reasonable person would have backed down, learned an apology, and stepped out of the way. But if there's one thing I've learned about Karen Wilkinson, it's that she is anything but reasonable when someone challenges her authority. She actually laughed at the officer. "You can't arrest me for enforcing community guidelines on private property. I know my rights. This procession violates our bylaws section 7.2 regarding unauthorized parades and processions." Her tone was dripping with smugness. The officer gave Karen one final warning, which she completely ignored. Still standing firmly in front of the hearse with her hand raised like she owned the entire street. What happened next was both shocking and, I'll admit, incredibly satisfying. The officer calmly stepped off his motorcycle, pulled out his handcuffs, and informed Karen she was under arrest for obstructing a funeral procession, disorderly conduct, and refusing to comply with a lawful order. The look on Karen's face was unforgettable, pure stunned disbelief melting into outrage as she realized this was actually happening. "You can't do this," she shrieked as the officer gently but firmly guided her arms behind her back and secured the cuffs. "Do you know who I am? I'm the president of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association." "Ma'am, I don't care if you're the president of the United States," the officer replied calmly. "The law applies to everyone. Interfering with a funeral procession is a criminal offense that carries a fine of up to $5,000 and possible jail time in this state." As Karen was escorted to the back of the patrol car that had arrived, she glanced at me and the gathered neighbors, all of us standing there in a mix of shock and disbelief. "This is your fault, Harrison," she screamed, her face burning red with humiliation. "I'll have you evicted for this. The board will hear every detail." I simply shook my head and turned my focus back to Mr. Jenkins' procession, which had resumed after the brief, disgraceful interruption. We all stood with our hands over our hearts as the hearse moved down the street, trying to reclaim the dignity of the moment that Karen had tried so hard to steal. Later that afternoon, the news spread through the community like wildfire. Karen had been taken to the county jail, booked, and forced to call her husband for bail. The charges were serious. Interfering with a funeral procession was indeed a criminal offense, something Karen apparently never learned despite her obsession with quoting rules and regulations at everyone else. The best moment came 3 days later when an emergency HOA board meeting was announced. I attended along with what felt like every single homeowner in the entire neighborhood. The room was so packed that people were lining the walls and spilling into the hallway. The meeting was called by the vice president, Tom, a reasonable guy who had often tried, and failed, to rein in Karen's more extreme interpretations of the bylaws. In light of recent events, Tom began, looking uncomfortable but resolute. "The board has voted to remove Karen Wilkinson from her position as president of the Homeowners Association. Effective immediately." The room erupted in applause. I glanced toward Karen, sitting in a corner with her arms tightly crossed. Her face was twisted with fury, but beneath it, I could see the realization setting in that she had finally crossed a line she couldn't wiggle her way back from. Once the noise settled, Tom continued. "Additionally, the association will issue a formal apology to the Jenkins family for the disruption to their loved one's funeral procession. And finally, our legal counsel has informed us that the association's insurance will not cover Karen's legal expenses, as her actions were entirely outside her authority." At this, Karen bolted upright. "This is outrageous. Everything I did was to protect this community and uphold our bylaws." "You can't just—" "The bylaws include a clause regarding board members engaging in conduct detrimental to the community," Tom interrupted, holding up the same rulebook Karen had weaponized against us for years. "Your actions brought negative media attention, exposed the association to potential liability, and most importantly caused harm to a grieving family in our neighborhood." The vote was unanimous. I watched the color drain from Karen's face. The financial consequences were sinking in. She would have to pay for her own legal defense, likely thousands of dollars, and potentially face a hefty fine if convicted. And that was just the start. Karen worked as a real estate agent specializing in HOA communities. This kind of scandal would be devastating to her career. "You'll hear from my attorney," Karen sputtered, clutching her designer handbag and her ever-present clipboard. "This is a witch hunt. I won't tolerate it." Her voice cracked, betraying the crumbling confidence behind her anger. As she stormed toward the exit, she paused beside my chair and leaned down. "I hope you're happy, Harrison," she hissed so only I could hear. "You've wanted this from the beginning." I looked up at her calmly. "Actually, Karen, all I ever wanted was for you to follow the golden rule, just the HOA rules." Apparently, that was asking too much. Her face twisted in rage, but for once, she was speechless. When the door slammed behind her, I couldn't help thinking that justice sometimes arrives in unexpected forms. For an HOA tyrant who had spent years making everyone miserable with her petty power trips and selective rule enforcement, there was something poetic about her downfall being caused by ignoring the laws that actually mattered, not petty mailbox colors, but basic human decency and respect for a grieving family honoring their loved one.